Welcome back to the Radio Academy podcast. I'm your host, Georgy Jamieson, and this week our guest is Paul Gerrard, Content Director for Hits Radio. Recently, several heritage local stations such as Hallam, Metro and Radio City rebranded to Hits Radio, and I wanted to know more about how you plan, implement and market such a huge change. I started by asking Paul how you go about putting together a brand relaunch as big as this one.
With a lot of planning and a lot of collaboration, I think. To take you back really at the beginning of this journey, obviously a lot of this started with a big piece of insight with the audience because, you know, we've had these brands in these markets for decades. So what we wanted to really understand was, could we do this and make it work? And would the audience come with us on that journey? So we spent an awful lot of time talking to listeners, not just listeners to our current brands, but also to listeners to other radio stations to find out if we did this, would this be an attractive proposition for them to come over and trial us? So we did a huge piece on that. And that second word of collaboration is obviously a huge piece because this is way bigger than just me and a team of presenters. This involves every potential department really across Bauer, really, when you look at it, because you've got huge functions that have got a massive amount of work to do to get us rebrand ready. So I think if you look at the on-air team, not only did we need to make sure we had all the right presenters to go out and do this, which we've been working on over the years. We've got an amazing team, both here at the national sort of HQ and also all of our regional stations across the country. But we also needed to make sure we had some really compelling content ready to roll. So it's not just about the day you make the switch, but what the radio stations are doing for the next 12 months. And, you know, the team have worked tirelessly to make sure we've got a really exciting plan for the next 12 months whilst we're out there marketing and inviting people over to try Hits Radio. But whilst you're also doing that, you've got a marketing team, which again, are just a phenomenal bunch of people that have really created something truly unique, I believe, in radio marketing terms. And they work with external agencies. And the world we live in now, it's way more complicated than just making a 30-second TV ad and a pretty billboard. You know, there's over 280 different versions of the visual ad alone. So that's been a huge amount of work. And as you can imagine, that lives everywhere now, from, you know, your traditional TV spots to, you know, pre-roll on YouTube to on-demand channels like, you know, Channel 4 on demand and ITVX, and then all the different versions of a social campaign. So you're not only these days filming a TV ad in 16:9, but you've also got to think about what it looks like on a mobile device. So huge complexities there. You know, speaking of complexities as well, when you think about kind of the technical development when you're launching a new station and a new brand, you've got to think about all the apps, all the partner apps, how we work with Amazon, how we work with Apple. And we've got a team who've been working day and night getting everything ready. So a listener can find us on their smart speaker with the new brand just as easily as they could with the old brand. And that level of work extends to, you know, our social teams, our web teams. They've just shout out to the likes of Sasha in our social team and Laura across our online, because what they've had to really do is make sure we've got great, compelling content on there, all living in this brand new Hits Radio universe. And they've done a phenomenal job with that.
How long has the planning taken? How long has this been, you know, in the offing?
Personally, I'd say it's been my sort of plan and dream since I joined Bauer over 5 years ago, because this felt like a really good route of travel for us. I think as a bigger project, we've been really working on this for the last 18 months to make sure that we did all the due diligence before we decided to commit to the plan. As you can imagine, as the proximity to the date got closer, the team got wider and wider. And so from the beginning of this year, we've had a huge team working on this. So it's been a long-term project for many and a highly intense shorter-term project for an even wider team.
Did all the stations change at the same time, or was it a gradual rollout? Just describe what happened.
So from a rebranding perspective, yes, all of them changed at 6 a.m. at that time on that morning, you know, to a huge fanfare with a lot of production, the fireworks as you'd expect from a big radio rebrand. But, you know, I mentioned that, you know, it's been my plan and my dream really for the last few years. And I think what's really important about that is taking the audience on that journey. So actually what happened on Rebrand Day was we changed the name of the station. Everything they know and love about that radio station up until that point and what they'd been listening to over the last 12 months is exactly the same. You know, we've worked really hard on making sure sure, like I said, the correct teams are on air. We've got a razor sharp focus on our music, and, a big shout out to the likes of Toby McKenzie, who heads up our music and has found us a real clear space in the radio landscape. And, all of those pieces put together meant that actually the audience have been carried on that journey. So on the day we changed the name, okay, it's called something different, but the radio station still has absolutely the flavour and the content that they know and love.
Good morning. It's 6 a.m. Wednesday, 17th of April. We are Steve and Karen live across the Northeast.
And we're about to hit go on your brand new radio station. Get ready to turn it up because this is Hits Radio Northeast.
Hits Radio, make some noise!
I think it's time.
Turn it up. Turn it up.
Hits Radio.
The biggest hits.
What's up? This is Beyonce.
Hey, it's Dua Lipa.
Hey, I'm Ed Sheeran.
Hi, I'm Pink.
Hey, this is Taylor Swift.
Hits Radio.
Is
Here.
122 grand is all yours.
Baby, what's over?
The biggest throwbacks.
you should be turning it up. Am I the only one? Let me tell you.
Just put your hands up.
I am very excited for this. It's Anne-Marie. Hello.
How are you? It's Sam Smith.
The one and only, yeah?
I'm such a massive fan of you. You're hilarious.
It's Joel Corey.
Oh my gosh, that's funny.
Ed Sheeran on the show. Turn it up.
Hits Radio is coming in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This is Hits Radio.
We're on. We're here. Good morning. Welcome to Hits Radio. Let's kick off Wednesday with Pink.
Turn it up.
Turn it up with the biggest hits.
The biggest throwbacks.
This is
Hits Radio.
The music policy didn't change. For the listener and their experience, what has changed for them then in terms of content and what this means for the listener?
What does it mean for the listener? Because you're right, the music policy has been very much worked on over the last few years. And we've got that to a place that now we're in a really strong position. I think what it means as a new brand for the audience is they now get everything we make. Beforehand, as Hits Radio, we were always making quite a complicated decision about, is this content exclusively for Hits Radio as we grow a new brand there, or is it something that can sit across the network? We've now got a position where the audience can get absolutely everything that we make, which is great news for the team. It's great news for the audience. It means that they're exposed to like the big opportunities that we have. So, for example, our live event strategy is now known as Hits Radio Live and makes complete sense in all markets when we do that. And, when our talent go out and do amazing things, like, Sam was on The Jungle and he came first, which is amazing news, but he was a Hits Radio presenter. And, the listeners in the Northeast, it's not as simple for us to explain that. So actually now what it means is everyone's part of the same radio family and gets that exposure to all of our great content. And it allows us to go off and develop even further, and really secure our place in the future with, great opportunities that come our way.
It has been controversial in places. People don't always like change. They are heritage brands and heritage names in the radio world. What were the pros and cons you had to weigh up when you thought about losing those heritage station names?
The pros of doing this is about securing our future and making sure that radio is accessible and thriving as it can be in the decades to come, not even just for the next 12 months, but for the decades to come. We now live in a world where we're fighting against some huge tech giants like Spotify and Apple, and we're fighting for time on a device such as a mobile, and we need to be in more places than ever. So I think the pros of doing this gives us that simplicity to be able to be in those places and actually make sure that we are able to compete against those huge tech giants. When you look at reactions from an audience, whenever you do a brand change, what's really clear is that audiences love the content that you go out and make. And they have real power. When you drill down to what they think about a radio station, they're actually not necessarily talking about a name. They're talking about the content that you create, the music you play, those big competitions, the presenters they know and love. And that's why that piece of insight was really important, because, you know, we fully recognize the fact we had brands that had been around in markets for decades. That's a big thing to overcome. And that's actually one of our big challenges, is how do you get that emotional connection as quickly as possible with the audience and a new brand, when in fact they've had potentially up to 40 years to form an alignment with a radio brand. There's a lot of things in our armory, and we do an awful lot of good work down on the ground. You know, our locality is really important. You know, we've got incredible news teams up and down the country, out and about more than ever before. Our work with our charity, we'll do a huge piece of activity with Sam Thompson, visiting a ton of schools across the country as he attempts to walk 1 million steps for our charity Cash for Kids. And all of that money raised locally stays locally. And these are the points that the audience begin to connect with this new name and go, do you know what? This station's making a big difference in my local area. So that's
important to get across,
really
though,
important,
isn't it? Yeah, that, like when you say that the money stays locally, is that something that you've had to really reinforce to get that, something like that? Because I think that's really important, because when you lose a heritage brand and you think, oh, the big boys are just coming in, it's all being swallowed up as one thing. But when you say something like that, I think that that's really key to keeping the locality of local radio.
It is, and I think it's radio's superpower. We see the tech giants, and we know they've got all the insight of what music people like, you know, and we're battling in that same world. But what we're able to do that they're not is have that amazing human connection. As a brand, we stand for an awful lot of things. You know, our job is fundamentally to make people smile, make them laugh, you know, entertain them on the way home. But we also have a huge role in our communities to make a difference. And when something's not right, I mean, for example, this summer, tens and tens of thousands of kids will go without food during the summer holidays because there's no schools open during the 6 weeks, obviously, and that's where they were getting fed. So, you know, our big campaign this year is to make sure that we can help put food on the table there, and we'll do that across all of our local areas. And that's what radio is brilliant at, in the same way that we can capture that live moment of being in the moment. And, you know, there's been hundreds of examples of that from the entire industry over the years, where radio's superpower comes to its own strength about being in that moment. And that is where that emotional connection comes from. And by doing this as well, we've actually been able to push our local content even harder. For Hits Radio, we now have every Hits Radio listener in the north of England is now being given local news, local weather, local travel, and a local breakfast show in the morning. And it's allowed us to then expand our distribution for our sister station, Hits Radio Pride. So, and that's a really good example of a community-based radio station which started life as a pop-up station. And now, thanks to this brand rollout, we've been able to expand the DAB distribution for Hits Radio Pride as well. So giving the audience more choice and super serving an audience with a real specific brand, which does an amazing job in the community.
This has been about strengthening the consistency of the Hits name. How do you reinforce? I mean, I think you kind of almost answered this. I'm talking about that Cash for Kids thing. I think it's so important. But how do you reinforce a positive marketing image around a change?
I mean, I'm a big believer in positivity. That's probably, you know, my driving force when I get up in the morning. So I think what's been really special about this piece is using the people as the ambassadors to it. As soon as we announced to the entire team we were going to make this change, the first thing we did was we got everybody together. We brought them all down to our brand new London HQ, which if you've not seen yet, I'd love to show you around, because
I'll take you up on that.
Absolutely, come down and see it, because it's a phenomenal place. And we had everybody from the team come down and join, and we talked them through the brand, the vision, why we were doing it, most importantly, and what we needed from them. There was just this insane energy from everybody in the room. And I think I'm a big believer that, you know, each of our presenters is the ambassador for what we're doing. Sure, the marketing is hugely important, but if we're all fired up by it, and we can go on the radio every day and excite our audience about it, that is the positive gear change that we needed to take our audience on the journey. Because if you're listening to somebody in the morning and they say, this is cool, don't worry, come with us on this, that's half the battle done. Each of our teams has done a phenomenal job in really buying into what we're doing here and sharing that journey with the audience. And we've been really honest about it. You know, that some of the presenters have even had sweepstakes on air with the presenters and the listeners about when they'll trip up and say the old station name. You know, we're being honest and we're having a really good time with the audience because it's like we're humans. They've done a brilliant job with that. Obviously, the marketing is a big part of how you sell that positive image around a brand as well. And I think when an audience is getting to grips with something new, and, you know, it is, you know, we've all been through brand changes in multiple products in life that we all come into contact with. But then when you see a huge billboard or you see a TV advert in the middle of your favourite show, or if it pops up on your feed, on your own timeline next to your mates, that all helps start selling the positivity around the brand. And I think I alluded to it earlier, but the whole campaign is designed to be very non-traditional radio. It's some of our most familiar talent going out and just hanging out with listeners up and down the country. And there's an energy about it. There's a bit of fun that goes with it. The whole thing screams positivity. I think the marketing and the people combined is absolutely are key to sort of landing this in a positive manner.
You mentioned some of the technical aspects in terms of social media and marketing and that sort of thing, but tell me about the kind of nuts and bolts, the studios, the buildings, the signage, interiors, local advertising. How complicated has all that been to arrange and coordinate?
How complicated? Very complicated. It's a beast when you're trying to do this across so many radio stations. I think this is probably one of the most complicated rebrands radio scene in this country, to be fair. I think obviously we've invested an awful lot of money in new facilities. I think, you know, the brand new studios in London are now the best radio studios across Europe, in my opinion. When you look at our regional sites such as Newcastle, Birmingham, Swansea, we've just opened a brand new site. We're about to spend a significant amount of cash on our studios in Manchester. We've really upped the quality of our studio facilities, and by doing that, not only is it an audio piece, but the camera kit that goes into each of those studios, so this content can live fully 360. You know, we have a very simple strategy here at Bauer, and it's look, listen, live and local. And the look element is something that we're investing heavily in at the moment, because if people want to hear it, they want to see it, and then therefore that content lives on. That's been a complex but big project, I'd say. I think the other pieces is these days in radio, it's no longer as simple as, you know, what just goes up one transmitter. You know, we've got obviously so many ways of distributing our content, and some of that is owned by us and some of it is with third parties. So if you can imagine the complexities of working with the likes of the tech giants like Amazon, Apple, Google, to make sure that we're ready for a rebrand, and a listener's journey when they're asking for the station is so simple that they can just ask it to play Hits Radio. But behind the scenes, the devices are knowing, okay, yeah, you're living in this part of the country, we'll give you this version of Hits Radio. You've got all of that happening beforehand and continues to work as well. You know, we're also getting the radio station ready for our brand new aggregate app, Rayo, when that launches with Hits Radio on a little later. There's a lot going on, and there's a big team, and they all put in an absolute shift to get us there for launch day, but that work carries on for months afterwards as well.
But with the those heritage buildings, you know, like Hallam and Metro, and so, I mean, they would have had their signage. Did you have to come in and, I mean, it's much more than just sticking a new mic muff on, isn't it? You know,
yeah. I mean, you can imagine the shopping lists, and, you know, we've got buildings all over the country, and, you know, they've had those brands for years. So yeah, there was a huge list of different things, and obviously nothing's the same at any site. So everything's custom made for that particular wall in that particular corner of the office in Leeds. So we've got a chap called Dom from the Northeast who I think literally went around every single site with a tape measure and measured everything. Yeah, huge shout out to him and the marketing team that have made our buildings all brand ready for day one, because it was by no means it was a huge project.
What have you learned from all this? And what would you do differently if you had to do it again?
What have we learned? I don't know if I learned it. I think it reaffirmed it for me. You know, whenever you change something, whenever you do something, the biggest fear, I think, in our game is that nobody cares. There's been experiences of that in the past, and I think what you really thrive on when you do something like this is that connection between yourself and the audience. Everyone has an opinion, whether they agreed with what we did or are still trying to come to terms with it. I think that's brilliant. It shows how important radio is in the landscape, because quite frankly, it could be so easy just to be sat in the background, and audiences are so hugely passionate about radio, and our job now is to really excite them about this new thing that they don't know much about. That is a really exciting challenge. And I really hope, and I'm really confident that we will have that loyalty over a period of time, because people still have so much time and space for radio. I think, obviously, we did an awful lot of research beforehand. So every decision we took was based on not really what we set in a meeting room and came up with, but what the audience told us. And, we had to go back and double check a few things. So we wanted to make sure we got that right. So that insight was really important. So that should really serve us well through it. What would we do differently if we ever did it again? Look, every time we do a project like this, it's different, because you're basing it on the insight. Obviously, you can see the success we've had with Greatest Hits Radio. That brand went on a huge journey, and some of that was forecasted from the start, and some of that just naturally evolved, and we've built all of that learning into what we've just done with Hits Radio. But I think there's never a carbon copy approach. You can't, because brands have different audiences, there's different parts of the country, there's different teams involved. So what would we do differently? Probably a ton of stuff, because it would be a different project, whatever that project looked like. There's always a ton of learnings from these things. But I'm really pleased with the way it's landed. I think the team have done a phenomenal job with it. Our ambition, hands down, is to be the UK's biggest pop station. And I know we've got a brilliant team that will get us there.
Paul, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for being my guest. How can people find Hits Radio? What do they need to tell old Lexa to do, or whatever?
Tell Alexa.
I don't say the full name here, because otherwise they go off all around my house.
Well, you can yell at Alexa whenever you like, play Hits Radio, and she will deliver. But I'd highly recommend the Hits Radio app. And of course, you can get us across the country, in a large parts of the country, on FM now, which is fantastic news, on DAB, and of course at the website, hitsradio.co.uk.
A big thank you to my guest, Paul Gerrard, Content Director from Hits Radio. If you're thinking about going to the Radio Academy Festival on the 18th of September, then tickets are on sale now. And if you're a freelancer, then our early bird discount of 30% finishes on the 12th of June. So don't hang around. There's also discounted tickets for low earners and a bursary scheme. So check out all the details on our website, radioacademy.org/festival. Next week's podcast will be capturing the sounds of the Crossed Wires Podcast Festival in Sheffield. It's a brand new podcast festival, so to find out more, you can go on their website, crossedwires.live. I'll be there chatting to people taking part and coming along to hear the sessions with some big names. I'll see you next week.